So, I'm at a party in the Silicon Valley, and we're all talking about what we do. And I say, I'm a poet. And the person next to me, who happens to be a CEO of a pretty fancy company, whose name I won't mention, says, gee, I'm sorry. And I said, I'm sorry? And he said, well, you must feel so bad that handwriting is going to be obsolete in 30 years, and the voice is going to be obsolete in 40 years. Really, I thought. Then I thought, don't punch the guy. Now, let's leave to aside the question of whether or not that's the future I want or you want for just a minute. Let's leave to the side the question of whether now, facing enormous economic crises engendered by the outsourcing of jobs, we need to move on to the outsourcing of body parts. Let's just put those on hold and look at what I'm doing as I begin this talk and what people have been doing all day as they talk with us. I just told a story that's a little illustrative shard. It's the tip of the iceberg. It's something that probably opens up questions in all of our minds. Where are we going? What is technology for? What's the body for? What's the voice for? And what's poetry for? In journalism, you might call that a lead. But it turns out that the very ancient technology of poetry already has a word for what I just did. It's called a metonym. Metonym. It happens to be a Greek word, and in case it feels like Greek to you, I'll just break it down as what we call part for the whole. Now, I'm obsessed with the technologies of poetry. I like to think about the way that meaning is compressed in the voice, is compressed in stories, is compressed in rhythm, is compressed in rhyme. I love to think about what language does. One of the things that language can do is to make these metonyms, these kind of short compressions that kind of dazzle us, that are the tip of the iceberg, the part for the whole. So we use metonymy all the time when we say Wall Street instead of referring to the entire banking industry, or when we say the Hague to refer to the center of Europe. That's just a common metonym. Poetry is made up of that kind of thing all the time. Emily Dickinson has a poem that I'm going to share with you that's just a really beautiful little poem that plays with metonymy. And I feel like I'm blocking it because it's so small. To make a prairie, it takes a clover and a bee, and reverie. The reverie alone will do, if bees are few. I love this poem. I love the notion that when you're seeing a bee, you're actually seeing a prairie made miniature. And in my time at the Seamus Heaney Poetry Center, I've been thinking about the kinds of metonyms that interest me and that feel like the tip of the iceberg. That story with the CEO that's set in California is maybe just one of them. I've been thinking about the way that California, in its conflicts, might be a metonym for the kind of conflicts that are facing the larger world now. The stories that I see in my daily life going through my home place. I was at the Constable exhibit here in Edinburgh, and I was remembering that Constable said, to paint one's own place first is best. So Heaney also wrote poems, beautiful poems about place in Northern Ireland, about his voice, his language, his river, his backyard, his childhood. And they resonate for all of us. And that's one of the things that poetry can do, is to take these little stories of our lives and broadcast them beautifully. So outside this room where that CEO was talking, we live on incredible gulfs and rifts. There's 2,000-year-old redwoods, global immigration. There is an increasing number of homeless people encamped under our freeways. San Francisco is the city with the greatest inequality in the United States. You can't even make a median income there because it's irresponsible, because there's one income peak at the top and one income peak at the bottom. I literally live on two fault lines. My home is at a place where fault lines intersect, which means that an earthquake might destroy my life at any moment. But I also feel that I live on rifts that embody the rifts that are part of our wider, modern, fast-moving world. And so I've been thinking about that, about how to layer those stories together into something that I'm working on now. So I'm going to read you 2 poems from this work in progress called Rift Zone. Year of drought and protests. November sunset, sherbet meeting dusk, horizon, opalescent abalone, traffic throb on freeways, muscle blue dusk across warehouses and shoreline. The traffic's clotted. Train stopped tonight, another death, another jumper, 3rd this month, a rash of copycats and people stalled, oh, in this hard year of drought and protests. From the station, we see curve and flicker. Headlights out to the foreclosed-on borders, 100 station goers dispersing, calling cabs or friends. Public life rerouted, circumnavigating private pain. Deep inside the shadows, someone's absence, catalytic, unrecoverable hub, synapse, tendon, self collapsing. Oh, dead anonymous, we each hurry on, not looking. Still, in the sunset, all our taillights throb. Poems can unsettle us quickly and ask us to reflect where we are, not just in the present, but in the flow of history. A year ago today, I was in the mountains on paths that had been blasted to cross the Sierra Nevada, which is an enormous global project that wove America together at some cost. Anyway, that was the day I started thinking of this poem. The day the UK votes Brexit, white supremacists march on Sacramento. High in the Sierra, green summer aspen whisper to the lake. The snowpack glitters. Over the passes, Winnebago, thunder out of the wide red flats of Nevada. Huge crooked knuckles, the dark screes loom. Deep in the roadbeds, the bones of the Irish and Chinese workers who were pitted against one another to drive down the price of their labor, whose bodies were shattered, dynamiting these crossings, stir in their graves. You'll be happy to know that I didn't stay at that party very long that night. And I went on, and later that night, I was attending a reading that was given by the poet Robert Pinsky, who's a friend and a mentor of mine, and a wonderful orator. He was the poet laureate of the US for many years, and is just a terrific elder statesman of letters. If you ever have a chance to see him, do. And when he was talking, that very same night, he said that the poem is wonderful because it is a record of human breath, and because it is a column of air, and that when you recite the poem of someone else, you embody that poem, and you become that person's column of air. It was such a wonderful notion. Voice, body, breath, intimacy, my story, my part for the whole, your part for the whole. That's the technology I want to be on the side of. Later, here at the Heaney Center, I've been thinking again about Heaney's great legacy to poetry, and he said something wonderful in his book, Government of the Tongue. Here's the paradox of poetry and the imaginative arts in general. Faced with the brutality of historic onslaught, they are practically useless. Yet they verify our singularity. They strike and stake out the ore of self that lies at the base of any individuated life. I'm going to repeat that. They strike and stake out the ore of self that lies at the base of any individuated life. Thinking about it that way, the poem isn't a record of what happens. It's the way we come to know what happens at all. It's that dense little place where our knowledge begins, our perception begins. We learn to see and think and inhabit our lives. Again, voices, breath, bodies, opportunity to engage our resources of attention, courage, precision, imagination, specificity, human shape. If this is poetry, I'm on the side of the technology of poetry. So I'm just going to leave you with one more poem from the wilds of California. Mountain lion near Tennessee Valley. At first it seemed to be a dog or deer, but was bullish, big, too much a saunter, tawny, muscling a ridge it took in easy strides. It stood, terse shape on dense blue air, half flicking, dream or superhero sized. No mistaking now its panther stance on the wet mountain. Its gaze held our full advantage. We waited for a moment, barely breathing, sensing it both as real and legend, awed and also reaching for the rocks for a scrambled uphill trail ahead, as if that would matter if it wanted us, which it seemed not to. Still, our chatter shifted as our landscape became undomesticated, as scarp reopening as vast slope for fear that was also pleasure in being watched by such a creature who could harm and did not care for us, and whose golden stride elided with the mountain, gliding down the range we clambered up, clumsy, fresh to our raw human noise. Thank you.